The heavy, ornate silver spoon slipped from my 9-year-old niece's hand, but it was not an accident. I watched in slow motion as Darby gripped the edge of the shallow porcelain bowl sitting in front of her. The bowl contained a thick, dark, steaming portion of imported truffle mushroom soup that cost $200. It was a specialty at Le Petit Chateau, the most exclusive French restaurant in the city. Before I could even register the malicious glint in her eyes, Darby shoved the bowl forward with all her might, sending it right off the edge of the mahogany table. The thick, scalding dark liquid splashed violently across my lap. It soaked instantly into the pristine white silk of my custom-tailored dress, a $500 garment I had bought with my own hard-earned money to celebrate my recent promotion. The heat of the soup burned against my skin, but it was the freezing chill of the humiliation that paralyzed me. Dark brown stains spread like a grotesque map across the delicate white fabric, dripping down onto the polished hardwood floor. The busy, sophisticated hum of the upscale restaurant vanished in an instant, leaving a vacuum of dead, suffocating silence at our table. I slowly raised my eyes, expecting to see a child's face twisted in horror or guilt. Instead, Darby was staring right back at me. A nasty, superior little smirk twisted her lips. She looked exactly like her mother. "Clean it up like a maid, Aunt Merritt," Darby sneered, her high-pitched voice cutting through the ambient noise of clinking wine glasses around us. "You were used to doing the dirty work anyway." My chest tightened so fast I could barely draw a breath. The sheer disrespect, the raw humiliation of being spoken to like a stray animal by a child in a crowded, high-end restaurant hit me like a physical blow. It was a targeted, rehearsed cruelty. But the true heartbreak, the thing that actually shattered my composure, was what happened next. Nobody gasped. Nobody scolded her. My brother-in-law, Thatcher, threw his head back and let out a booming, theatrical laugh. He actually slapped the table, wiping a tear of pure amusement from his eye, his expensive watch catching the ambient light. My own sister, Sutton, just rolled her eyes, gave a dismissive little shrug, and took another sip of her sparkling champagne. She did not even look at the ruined dress or her malicious daughter. My mother, Greer, frowned in my direction, not out of sympathy, but out of annoyance. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Merritt, do not make a scene," Greer whispered harshly, leaning across the table. "You are ruining the vibe of the evening. Just go to the restroom and dab it with some water." It is not a big deal. They thought it was hilarious. They thought my degradation was prime dinner entertainment. They looked at me not as a daughter or a sister, but as a punching bag that existed solely to absorb their toxic waste. I did not scream. I did not throw my glass of iced water in Thatcher's face, no matter how much my instincts begged me to. I simply sat there for one agonizing moment, letting the icy reality of my family dynamic wash over me. For years, I had swallowed their insults. I had endured their endless mockery because society conditioned me to believe that family is a bond you never break. They demanded my presence at these dinners just to have someone to look down upon. But looking at the dark truffle oil soaking into my favorite dress, while my blood relatives giggled at my expense, the fragile thread tying me to them finally snapped. My name is Merritt. I am 31 years old, and I am a senior forensic accountant for the United States Department of Labor. I hunt down corporate pension embezzlement for a living. I track hidden money, and I ruin the lives of white-collar criminals who think they are smarter than the federal government. And in that moment, staring at my ruined dinner and my stained silk dress, I realized exactly how I was going to dismantle the fake, hollow empire my toxic family had built. I reached into my designer handbag, my hands steady and calm. I pulled out a crisp $100 bill and laid it gently next to my empty plate to cover my portion of the starters. I stood up, smoothing the front of my ruined dress with forced dignity, and picked up my coat from the back of the chair. "Where are you going?" Thatcher scoffed, swirling the wine in his glass. "Can you really not take a joke, Merritt? This is why you are always so miserable. You have zero sense of humor. Sit down." I looked dead into his eyes. I saw the fake confidence, the tailored suit that could not hide his inherent insecurity, the arrogant smirk of a man playing with money he did not truly own. He called himself a logistics king, but I knew exactly what he was. "Enjoy your meal," Thatcher, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying enough weight to make his smirk falter just a fraction. And Darby, you might want to learn some basic manners before your daddy's money evaporates into thin air. I turned around and walked out of the restaurant. I could hear Sutton sighing loudly behind me, complaining to the waiter about her dramatic, bitter younger sister. The crisp night air hit my face the moment I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant. I handed my ticket to the valet, tipped him generously, and slid into the driver's seat of my sleek black sedan. I drove home in utter silence. I did not turn on the radio. I just listened to the steady hum of the engine, letting the cold, calculating part of my brain take the wheel. I pulled into the secure underground parking garage of my downtown building. My apartment was a custom-designed penthouse that I had purchased in cash. It was a fact my family conveniently ignored because it did not fit their narrative of me being the poor, struggling spinster. I walked into my kitchen, kicked off my shoes, and poured myself a generous glass of aged bourbon. I carried the drink into my home office and sat down in my leather ergonomic chair. The dual monitors of my workstation gleamed in the dim light. I unlocked my secure federal laptop and logged into a very specific private estate management portal. It was time to pull the plug. But how far was I willing to go to destroy my own blood? To understand the sheer magnitude of what was about to happen, you have to understand the invisible museum of pain I had been living in for 3 decades. My family was not just dysfunctional, they were an ecosystem built on tearing me down to elevate themselves. Growing up, I was the classic invisible child. Sutton was the golden girl. She was 4 years older, breathtakingly pretty, and infinitely more demanding. She was the one my mother, Greer, paraded around the neighborhood. Greer was a prominent figure on the Homeowners Association board, a woman who valued social standing, country club invitations, and the illusion of wealth above genuine human connection. I was just the quiet, studious afterthought. My exhibits in this museum of pain were painfully clear. Exhibit A happened when Sutton turned 18. She had barely scraped by in high school, yet Greer and my father bought her a brand new silver Mercedes as a graduation gift. When I turned 18 and graduated as valedictorian with a full scholarship to study accounting, Greer told me I needed to build character. She forced me to take out aggressive student loans to cover my living expenses, claiming the family had no extra cash. I spent my college years eating instant noodles and working night shifts while Sutton posted pictures of her luxury vacations on Instagram. Exhibit B was a more recent artifact. Last Thanksgiving, Thatcher decided to hold court in the living room. Thatcher ran a mid-sized trucking and logistics firm. He was a man who spoke entirely in corporate buzzwords and possessed a staggering amount of unearned confidence. He viewed my federal job as a tragic waste of time. In front of 20 extended family members, he raised his glass and called me a glorified bean counter. He told everyone that I audited corporate spreadsheets because I was too scared and untalented to build real wealth in the private sector. My mother nodded in agreement. Sutton laughed. But Exhibit C was the artifact that shifted the power dynamic forever. When my father passed away unexpectedly 5 years ago, he left behind a massive commercial real estate portfolio. He also left behind a legal shockwave. His will established a $2.5 million trust fund, and he designated me as the sole legal trustee. Not his wife. Not his favorite golden daughter. Me. My father was a quiet man, but he was not blind. He knew Greer would burn through the cash to maintain her socialite facade. He knew Sutton was profoundly irresponsible, obsessed with being a suburban lifestyle influencer. And he knew Thatcher was a reckless gambler wearing a businessman's suit. He trusted my mind. He knew I was methodical, rational, and immune to their emotional manipulation. That decision painted a target on my back that had never washed off. For 5 years, I managed the trust perfectly, growing the principal while distributing modest monthly stipends to Greer and Sutton. But Thatcher's ego could not handle it. 2 years ago, his logistics firm hit a massive cash flow crisis. He needed a massive business line of credit to keep his trucks on the road. He convinced my mother to leverage her portion of the estate trust as collateral for his bank loan. It was a risky, foolish move. To keep the peace and get Greer to stop crying on my doorstep, I legally allowed the collateral tie. However, as a seasoned forensic accountant, I never sign anything blindly. I quietly inserted a strict financial covenant into the banking agreement. A covenant is a legally binding condition. It stated that if Thatcher's company liquidity dropped below a certain threshold, or if his debt-to-income ratio exceeded federal safety guidelines, the bank had the right to freeze the credit line immediately to protect the trust's collateral. I sat in my dark office, the taste of the bourbon burning the back of my throat. I looked at the glowing screen of my laptop. For the last 4 months, I had been watching Thatcher's firm bleed to death. He was drowning in bad investments and stalled freight contracts. To hide his massive losses from the bank, he had been inflating his asset valuations and shuffling money between shell accounts. It was textbook corporate fraud, the exact type of financial crime I hunted for a living. I had gathered the proof. I had built the spreadsheet. I had simply kept it in my back pocket, offering him a silent grace period because he was my sister's husband. I had tried to be the bigger person. I had tried to preserve the family. But as I looked down at the dark truffle stain ruining the white silk of my dress, the grace period officially expired. They wanted a maid? They were about to get an executioner. I opened my email client. I attached the encrypted financial reports detailing his manipulated balance sheets and the direct violation of the loan covenant. I drafted a formal legal notice to the chief risk officer at the commercial bank, officially withdrawing the estate trust's backing of the collateral due to fraudulent reporting by the borrower. I hovered my mouse over the send button. I thought about the scalding soup on my skin. I thought about my mother telling me I was ruining the vibe. I thought about Darby's smug little face, a child bred to hate me by the very people I was legally protecting from bankruptcy. I clicked send. The wheels of institutional finance move with terrifying speed when high-level corporate fraud is reported by a certified federal auditor. I closed the laptop, finished my bourbon, and went to bed. I slept deeper and more peacefully than I had in years. Tomorrow, the illusion was going to shatter. But would I be ready for the monster that was about to break down my door? The morning sun crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, casting long, elegant shadows across the living room. It was exactly 7 in the morning. I was standing in my kitchen, sipping a cup of dark roast coffee, wearing my silk robe. My phone had been on Do Not Disturb all night. I tapped the screen to wake it up. The notification center was an absolute war zone. Over 60 missed calls. A tidal wave of frantic, aggressive text messages from Sutton, Greer, and Thatcher. At exactly 2 in the morning, an automated alert from the bank had fired into the family group chat because Greer was listed as a cosigner on the collateral. The message was brutal in its corporate simplicity: notice of account action. The commercial logistics line of credit has been permanently suspended due to covenant breach. All outstanding balances are subject to immediate review. I smiled into my coffee mug. The hurricane had made landfall. Exactly 4 minutes later, the private elevator that opened directly into my foyer dinged loudly. I stiffened. Only the building concierge and I had the access code. But then I remembered 3 years ago, when I had emergency appendix surgery, I had given Greer an override key card to feed my cat. She had never returned it, and I had forgotten to deactivate it. Heavy, frantic footsteps slapped against the hardwood floor. "Merritt, where are you?" Sutton shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings of my apartment. I set my mug down on the marble island and turned around. Sutton came storming into the living area, looking utterly unhinged. She was wearing expensive designer yoga pants and an oversized cashmere sweater. Her hair was a messy blonde nest, her eyes wide with panic. Greer was right behind her, clutching her luxury handbag like a shield, her face twisted in a scowl of deep, aristocratic disapproval. "Unlock it right now," Sutton screamed, marching up to the kitchen island and pointing a manicured finger at my face. "Unlock the bank account right now, Merritt. Do you have any idea what you have done?" I crossed my arms, leaning casually against the counter. "Good morning to you too, Sutton." "Mother, what a pleasant surprise. To what do I owe this home invasion?" "Do not play your sick little games with me," Sutton yelled, her voice cracking. Thatcher's business card was declined this morning. Declined merit. He was trying to pay the deposit for my country club holiday gala next month, and the bank told him the entire line of credit was frozen. Frozen by you. You need to call them right now and tell them you made a mistake on your stupid little computer. There was no mistake, Sutton, I said evenly. I did not freeze the account out of spite. Thatcher violated the financial covenant of the trust. He has been manipulating his balance sheets and hiding massive losses on his freight contracts. The bank had every right to pull his credit. As the trustee of Dad's estate, I had a strict fiduciary duty to withdraw our collateral before Thatcher dragged our family money down the drain with him. Sutton stared at me blankly. It was glaringly obvious she had no idea what a financial covenant was. All she heard was that I had cut off her endless supply of vanity funds. I do not care about your boring accountant words, Sutton snapped, her face turning bright red. You are just trying to ruin my life because you are miserable. You have always been jealous of me. You are jealous that Thatcher buys me nice things and gives me a beautiful family, and you are just a bitter, single government worker living in a lonely apartment with your cats. I almost laughed. I glanced around my sprawling, custom-designed penthouse that cost more than her heavily mortgaged suburban mansion, and simply shook my head. Greer stepped forward, her heels clicking aggressively. She positioned herself right next to Sutton, the fierce protector of the golden child. You listen to me, Merritt, Greer hissed, her voice dripping with misplaced rage. I never agreed with your father making you the executor of that trust. You're destroying this family. You sit up here in your ivory tower judging us. You hate the fact that Thatcher is a successful man who actually elevates our standing in the community. You hate him because he provides a life for your sister that you could never secure for yourself. The sheer delusion was breathtaking. My mother genuinely believed this fraudulent trucking manager was a prize simply because he threw money around at HOA dinners. She was willing to let him drain my father's hard-earned legacy just to keep up appearances. Thatcher is not elevating us, Mother, I said, my tone turning dangerously cold. He is stealing from us. He leveraged your portion of the estate to fund a company that is legally bankrupt. If I had not stepped in last night, you would have lost your own savings when the bank came to collect his debts. I am saving you. How dare you speak about my husband that way? Sutton screamed. Fix the account, Merritt. Call the bank right now, or I swear I will make your life a living hell. I am not calling anyone, I replied, standing tall. The trust is locked. Thatcher is on his own. With a guttural sound of pure frustration, Greer lunged forward. She raised her hand, aiming a vicious slap directly at my face. But I was not a child anymore, and I was not going to stand there and take her physical abuse. I took a swift, calculated step backward. Her hand sliced through empty air. The momentum caused her to stumble awkwardly in her expensive heels, crashing hard against the side of the marble island. She gasped, holding her hip, shocked by her own missed violence. Mom! Sutton shrieked, rushing to hold her. Greer straightened up, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with pure hatred. You are no daughter of mine. You are a cold, heartless witch. You will die alone, Merritt. I picked up my phone from the counter and pressed the speed dial for the front desk. Marcus, I have 2 unauthorized individuals in my penthouse. Please send security up to escort them out immediately and permanently revoke access for Greer. You are calling security on your own mother? Sutton gasped, looking around frantically as if searching for an audience. You have 2 minutes before they arrive, I said calmly. The heavy doors of the private elevator slid open again. My blood ran cold. Stepping out of the elevator was Thatcher. But he was not alone. Flanking him on either side were 2 uniformed city police officers, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Thatcher looked disheveled. The usual arrogant smirk was replaced by a tight, desperate grimace. He pointed a shaking finger directly at me. There she is, Thatcher shouted, his voice echoing in my foyer. That is her. Arrest her right now. How far was this man willing to go to protect his crumbling empire? The 2 police officers stepped into my private foyer, their expressions stern and evaluating. They moved past my confused mother and sister, who had frozen near the marble island, and approached my kitchen. Ma'am, "We need you to step away from the counter and keep your hands where we can see them," the older officer said, his voice deep and authoritative. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice. I calmly placed my hands flat on the cold marble, keeping my posture relaxed but commanding. "Officers, may I ask what is going on in my home?" Thatcher pushed his way forward, his face flushed with manufactured outrage. He was playing the role of the victimized business owner to absolute perfection. "Tell them the truth, Merritt," Thatcher yelled. He turned to the cops, adopting a tone of weary, desperate patience. "Officers, this woman is my sister-in-law. Early this morning, she illegally hacked into my secure corporate servers and stole highly confidential intellectual property and proprietary client data. She is attempting to extort my family and destroy my logistics firm. I want her arrested for corporate espionage and grand larceny." Sutton and Greer immediately rallied behind him. "It is true," Greer cried out, placing a dramatic hand over her heart, playing the distressed grandmother. "She has been threatening my daughter and my son-in-law all morning. She locked them out of their own bank accounts. She is completely out of control. You need to confiscate her computers and get Thatcher's property back." I stared at Thatcher. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this man was staggering. He knew he was financially ruined, so he was playing his only remaining card. He was weaponizing the local police to cover up his own massive federal fraud. He wanted them to seize my federal laptops, knowing it would tie up my evidence in local police custody for months. That would give him more than enough time to shred documents, flee the jurisdiction, or hide his remaining assets before a financial crimes unit ever looked at the data. He thought his privilege and his expensive suit would steamroll me. He thought the police would instinctively believe the affluent businessman over the calm woman standing in her kitchen. The younger officer, clearly intimidated by Thatcher's commanding tone, took a step toward me. "Ma'am, we are going to need to take a look around and secure your electronic devices until detectives can review them." I did not flinch. I knew exactly how this game was played. Any display of anger or hysteria on my part would immediately be used against me. I refused to give them the angry woman stereotype they were fishing for. "Do you have a warrant?" I asked, my voice as steady as a metronome. The older officer frowned. "Ma'am, given the claims of a cyber breach in progress and the exigent circumstances reported by the business owner, we have the authority to secure the scene to prevent the destruction of evidence." "No, you do not," I replied smoothly. "And before you make a career-ending mistake based on the fraudulent claims of a desperate man, I suggest you look at who you're dealing with." I moved slowly, deliberately reaching into the pocket of my silk robe. I pulled out a sleek black leather wallet. I flipped it open and slid it across the marble counter toward the older officer. The gold federal badge gleamed under the pendant lights, right next to my official government identification card. "My name is Merritt," I stated, my voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "I am a senior forensic accountant for the United States Department of Labor. I investigate multi-million-dollar corporate embezzlement for federal agencies. The data Mr. Thatcher is accusing me of stealing is not proprietary intellectual property. It is the fraudulent bookkeeping of a failing logistics firm that he illegally collateralized using my family's trust fund." The older officer's eyes widened as he read the federal seal on my credentials. He immediately took a step back, his hand dropping away from his utility belt. The shift in his posture was instantaneous, changing from aggressive enforcement to profound caution. I reached into the drawer in front of me and pulled out a thick, blue-bonded legal document. I handed it directly to the older officer. "That is a certified copy of my late father's estate trust," I continued, maintaining direct eye contact. "It names me as the sole legal trustee. It grants me legal authority to audit and freeze any assets tied to the trust's capital. Mr. Thatcher violated federal banking covenants. The digital files I possess are the legal property of the trust, gathered during a lawful audit to prevent the embezzlement he is currently committing. If you attempt to confiscate federal property without a federal warrant, you will be interfering with an active federal financial investigation, and I will personally have your badge numbers reported to your commanding officer by noon." The silence in the kitchen was deafening. The younger officer swallowed hard, stepping completely away from my counter. The older officer carefully placed the trust document back on the marble, his expression tight and incredibly apologetic. "Understood, ma'am," the older officer said, clearing his throat nervously. "My apologies for the misunderstanding. This is clearly a civil matter regarding estate management, and it falls entirely outside our jurisdiction." Thatcher's face turned a violent shade of purple. "A civil matter," he yelled, dropping his calm facade. "She is a thief. Are you seriously going to let her flash a badge and get away with this? Arrest her." The older officer turned to Thatcher, his patience entirely exhausted. "Sir, you called us out here for a cyber theft in progress. What we have here is a federal auditor executing her legal rights over financial documents. If you have a problem with how she is managing the trust, hire a lawyer. If you call emergency services again to report a false crime to settle a family dispute, I will arrest you for filing a false police report. Let's go." The officers turned and marched toward the elevator, leaving Thatcher completely exposed. His ultimate trump card had just been effortlessly neutralized. Sutton grabbed his arm, looking absolutely terrified of the police officer's threat. "Thatcher, let's just go." "We will call our lawyers, please," Sutton whimpered. Greer stood frozen, staring at me as if she had never seen me before. In that moment, she realized the quiet daughter she had spent decades underestimating held all the power. "You should leave, Thatcher," I said quietly. "And I strongly suggest you retain very expensive criminal defense counsel. You are going to need it." He glared at me with a hatred so pure it practically vibrated in the air. He turned on his heel and stormed into the elevator, dragging Sutton behind him. Greer gave me one last disgusted look before following them. The heavy doors slid shut. I let out a slow, steady breath. I had won the morning, but my instincts were screaming. Thatcher was too desperate. There was something else hidden in his numbers. I locked my door and went straight back to my secure laptop. I bypassed the standard banking portals and ran his corporate identification numbers through the deep-level federal databases. I dug into the exact routing numbers of his payroll accounts. 10 minutes later, the data populated on my screen, and the blood drained from my face. I had found the shocking numbers. Thatcher was not just bankrupt. He was facing decades in federal prison. Over the last 18 months, he had systematically embezzled $4.1 million directly from the pension fund of his own truck drivers. But he had not spent it on his company. The money had been wired in untraceable increments to a series of shadow lending firms, highly dangerous, unregulated syndicates that provided predatory loans to desperate gamblers. Thatcher owed the mob. What was a cornered, violent man going to do when he realized the federal government was about to freeze his only escape route? The revelation of the $4.1 million embezzlement shifted the entire landscape of my war. This was no longer just a family dispute over a spoiled child throwing soup or an arrogant brother-in-law flexing unearned wealth. This was a massive, catastrophic federal crime involving stolen pension funds and violent shadow lenders. Thatcher was a walking time bomb, and my mother and sister were strapped right next to the explosives, entirely oblivious. I needed to clear my head. I walked over to the window, looking out over the city skyline, when my phone vibrated. It was a secure call from Uncle Callahan. Callahan was my late father's younger brother. He was a retired military veteran, a quiet, observant man who lived a solitary life on a small farm outside the city. He was the only person in our extended family who saw through Greer's obsession with status and Sutton's toxic narcissism. He was my only ally in a family of vipers. "Merritt," Callahan's deep, gravelly voice came through the speaker. "I heard about the explosion this morning. Your mother called me in hysterics, demanding I talk some sense into you. She says you are trying to destroy Sutton's marriage." "I am trying to stop a criminal, Uncle Cal," I replied, rubbing my temples. "Thatcher is bankrupt. He leveraged the trust, and I had to freeze it to protect Dad's legacy. He is in deeper than any of them realize." Callahan sighed heavily, a sound carrying years of exhaustion. "Listen to me carefully, Merritt. You need to know what Greer did. She did not just leverage the trust for that boy." My stomach tightened into a cold knot. "What do you mean?" 3 weeks ago, Callahan continued, his voice dropping to a somber whisper. Greer came to me asking for a short-term loan. I refused. But she let something slip. Thatcher told her he needed immediate, untraceable cash to secure a massive international logistics contract. He promised her it would triple in value. So, Greer went behind your back. She secretly took out a second mortgage on the family cabin, the historic timber property your father left entirely to her. She pulled $200,000 in cash out of the equity and handed it directly to Thatcher. I stopped breathing. The room seemed to spin. The family cabin was not just a piece of real estate. It was the only tangible piece of my father's soul left in this world. It was where he taught me how to fish, where we spent every summer away from Greer's suffocating country club friends. My father had paid off that mortgage decades ago to ensure it would stay in the family forever. And my mother had mortgaged it. She had handed $200,000 of our heritage to a man who was using it to pay off illegal gambling debts to violent syndicates. She had funded his crimes just to keep Sutton living in a luxury mansion. She handed him the cabin, I whispered, the rage turning from hot fire to absolute, freezing ice. She sold Dad's memory to fund a fraud. Be careful, kid, Callahan warned. Thatcher is backed into a corner. Men like him do not go down quietly. I hung up the phone. The sheer magnitude of my mother's betrayal threatened to break me, but the training of a forensic accountant kicked in. Emotion is a liability. Data is a weapon. I opened my phone and went to Instagram. I needed to see what the enemy was doing. Sure enough, Sutton had just posted a tearful video on her stories to her thousands of followers. She was sitting in her luxury SUV, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, playing the ultimate victim. Hey guys, Sutton sobbed into the camera. I am just going through a really dark time today. My toxic, estranged sister is using legal loopholes to attack my husband's business because she is jealous of our happiness. She is trying to ruin our family. Please send prayers. Within minutes, the flying monkeys descended. My phone lit up with vicious text messages from Aunt Hollis and various members of Greer's HOA board, calling me a monster, a bitter spinster, and a disgrace to my father's name. They were orchestrating a massive public smear campaign to break my resolve. But I was not going to break. I was going to mutate. Freezing the bank account was a defensive move. It stopped the bleeding, but it did not give me control over Thatcher's fate. The shadow lenders did. If Thatcher owed them $4.1 million, they were the ones holding the leash. I needed to rip that leash out of their hands. I needed to own him. I spent the next 3 hours tracing the encrypted wire transfers Thatcher had sent to the shadow lending firm. These organizations operated outside the law, but they still functioned as businesses. They cared about mitigating financial risk. I found a burner contact number buried in the metadata of the wire routing protocol. I dialed the number. It rang twice before a dead, emotionless voice answered. Who is this? My name is Merritt, I said, my voice devoid of any hesitation. I am the sister-in-law of Thatcher. I know he owes your organization $4.1 million. And I know he missed his payment yesterday because I am the federal auditor who froze his accounts. A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. You have 10 seconds to explain why I should not send someone to your apartment right now, the voice replied, cold and metallic. Because I am offering you an exit strategy, I stated. Thatcher is radioactive. He is currently under active federal investigation. Within 72 hours, the FBI will freeze every asset attached to his name. When that happens, your $4.1 million becomes uncollectible. You lose everything. I want to buy his debt from you. In cash. Tonight. Another pause. The calculation was happening. Where? The underground parking garage of the Financial District Plaza. Level 3. 1 hour. I hung up. I was walking into the abyss. I was about to negotiate with violent criminals to buy the financial soul of the man who had destroyed my family. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. Would they kill me, or would they take the deal? The concrete cavern of the Financial District's underground parking garage was desolate and freezing. The flickering fluorescent lights cast long, distorted shadows across the empty parking spaces. The air smelled of damp cement and motor oil. My footsteps echoed sharply against the pavement as I walked toward the designated meeting spot on level 3. I was not wearing my federal badge. I was not wearing a power suit. I wore a simple dark trench coat, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. I needed to look like a buyer, not a cop. A black SUV with heavily tinted windows idled near a concrete pillar. As I approached, the engine cut off. The heavy doors opened, and two massive men stepped out. They were dressed in dark, unremarkable clothing, their presence radiating a calculated, professional violence. The lead man, Adler, stepped forward. He had a jagged scar running down his neck and eyes that looked like flat, dead stones. He looked at me, a slight smirk of condescension forming on his lips. He expected me to be a terrified civilian, a weeping family member begging for mercy. "You're the auditor," Adler said, his voice thick and grating. "You have a lot of nerve showing up here alone. Your brother-in-law is a dead man walking. He owes our employers $4.1 million. If you are here to ask for an extension, you can turn around and walk away." I stopped exactly 6 feet away from him. I did not take a step back. I looked him directly in his dead eyes. "I am not here to ask for anything, Adler," I said, keeping my voice entirely level. "I am here to solve a massive liability problem for your boss." Adler crossed his massive arms. "We do not have a problem. We know where Thatcher lives. We know where his wife lives. We know where his mother-in-law lives. We will extract our money one way or another." "No, you will not," I countered, my voice echoing clearly in the empty garage. "Because you cannot extract money that has been seized by the United States Treasury. I am the one who built the foundational embezzlement case against Thatcher. I know about the stolen pension funds. The federal warrants are already being drafted. When the FBI raids his house, any unregistered, off-the-books debt he owes you becomes entirely uncollectible. Federal seizure takes precedence over private promissory notes. If you hurt him, you get nothing. If he goes to federal prison, you get nothing. Your boss will have to write off a $4 million loss." Adler's smirk vanished. The aggressive posturing faded, replaced by a wary, calculating silence. The threat of federal involvement was the ultimate deterrent for organized syndicates trying to operate legitimate front companies. I was speaking their native language. Risk assessment. "So, what exactly are you proposing?" Adler asked. "I am proposing a buyout," I said, setting my leather briefcase down on the hood of a nearby parked car. "I know how your firm operates. You force desperate gamblers to sign legally binding promissory notes before you hand over the cash. Those notes are legitimate, transferable debt instruments on paper. I want to buy Thatcher's debt from you right here, right now." Adler scoffed, though the sound was noticeably less confident. "You want to pay his $4 million debt? How generous of the sister-in-law." "I am not paying $4 million, I replied coldly, my tone dropping to a deadpan flatline. "I am offering you pennies on the dollar for a highly toxic asset that is about to default permanently. I will give you $850,000 in clean, untraceable, fully taxed capital drawn directly from my personal legal investment portfolio. You take a massive loss on the interest, but your boss recoups a substantial chunk of his initial principal. More importantly, you get clean money that requires zero laundering, and you walk away before the federal investigators start looking into Thatcher's associates." The men fell silent, calculating the heavy weight of my offer. I was offering an elegant, mutually beneficial exit strategy from a completely doomed investment. "I am the only person on this planet who is willing to pay you for my brother-in-law's catastrophic mistakes," I added. "But you have to sign the legal debt transfer documents over to my private LLC. I assume you brought the original promissory notes with you." Adler stared at me for a long, heavy moment. He reached inside his jacket. I did not flinch. He pulled out a secure encrypted cell phone and dialed a number. He spoke rapidly in a foreign language for 2 minutes, occasionally glancing in my direction. The conversation was sharp, intense, and strictly business. Finally, he hung up the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. "Our boss accepts your terms," Adler said, his demeanor entirely professional now. "You have 24 hours to wire the funds to an escrow account we will provide." He reached into the SUV and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside were the original promissory notes signed by Thatcher, detailing the massive cash loans and the exorbitant predatory interest rates. On the back of the final page was a standard debt assignment clause. Adler clicked a pen, signed the authorization on behalf of his shadow firm, and handed the heavy clipboard to me. My hand was perfectly steady as I signed my name, officially transferring the massive $4.1 million debt to a private corporate entity I had set up years ago for my own property investments. I handed the clipboard back to him, securely keeping the original documents in my grasp. "I will initiate the wire transfer the moment I get upstairs," I said, picking up my briefcase. "It will clear by tomorrow morning." Adler looked at me, a strange expression of genuine respect crossing his rough, weathered features. "You are a very cold, calculating woman, Merritt. Your brother-in-law is an absolute fool to have crossed you." "We do not disagree on that," I said, turning toward the exit. "Tell your boss it was a pleasure doing business." I drove back to my penthouse, the adrenaline finally beginning to recede, leaving behind a sharp, terrifying clarity. I walked into my kitchen and dropped the manila envelope onto the marble island. I had just done the unthinkable. I had willingly handed over $850,000 of my own life savings to ruthless criminals. But as I stared at Thatcher's signature on those promissory notes, a dangerous, lethal smile spread across my face. I had not paid off his debt to save him. I had purchased the debt to own him. Legally, on paper, Thatcher now owed me $4.1 million. I was his sole creditor. I held the unquestionable power to demand immediate repayment, to seize his assets, and to destroy his life in civil court. He had let his daughter treat me like a maid. He had laughed while my dress was ruined. But I had just bought the keys to his entire existence. How was I going to spring this trap on him? Thank you for following this tense story all the way to the end of this act. Your patience and support are a huge motivation for me. If you are feeling thrilled and eagerly awaiting Merritt's massive comeback, please leave a comment with the keyword "I'mWin." This is a secret code reserved for true viewers of the channel. I will personally like and reply to any comment containing this keyword. Don't forget to like the video to give me the strength to continue with the next part. 2 weeks passed. The federal wheels of justice turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. I spent those 14 days working closely with the federal task force, methodically turning the pages of Thatcher's financial dossiers, building an airtight portfolio of his offshore movements and stolen pension funds. Then my phone rang. It was Sutton. I let it go to voicemail. 3 minutes later, I listened to the recording. Her voice dripped with practiced, fake sorrow. "Merritt, it is your sister. It is Thanksgiving this Thursday. Mom and I were talking, and we are willing to extend an olive branch. Thatcher and I are hosting at our house. We need to make peace and put this ugly business behind us. Do not embarrass us by refusing to show up. Make peace." That was my family's code phrase for sweeping toxic abuse under the rug. I knew exactly what this was. It was not a reconciliation. It was an ambush. Thatcher was getting desperate. His shadow lenders were gone, bought out entirely by me, but he did not know that yet. He just knew the phone calls from the mob had stopped. His staggering ego likely convinced him that the criminal syndicate had backed off, or that he had somehow outsmarted them. But he still needed cash. He still desperately needed me to legally release my grip on the primary estate trust to secure his final payday before the federal auditors closed in. I decided to attend. I did not go to make peace. I went to look my enemy in the eye and see exactly how arrogant he could be right before the floor collapsed beneath him. On Thanksgiving afternoon, I pulled up to Sutton and Thatcher's sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate in the affluent northern suburbs. The driveway was packed with luxury cars belonging to his wealthy friends. I walked up the manicured pathway and knocked on the massive oak door. Sutton opened it. She was wearing a perfectly tailored silk maternity dress, a strained, fragile smile plastered across her face. "Merritt, you actually came," Sutton said, her eyes starting nervously toward the living room. "Come in. Mom is in the kitchen." The house smelled of roasted turkey, expensive sage dressing, and desperate lies. Beneath the facade of a perfect holiday gathering, the tension was thick enough to choke on. My mother greeted me with a stiff nod, refusing to make eye contact. Darby, the 9-year-old menace who had ruined my dress, was sitting on the sofa playing on an iPad, ignoring everyone. Thatcher was holding court in the dining room, pouring imported wine into crystal glasses. When he saw me, his jaw tightened, but he quickly forced a wide, artificial smile. "Merritt, glad you could make it," Thatcher said loudly, playing the benevolent host. "Have a seat. Let's enjoy a nice family meal." We sat around the massive mahogany table. The spread was extravagant, funded entirely by stolen pension money and fraudulent loans. For the first 20 minutes, we ate in excruciating silence. Then Thatcher cleared his throat, wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, and leaned back in his leather dining chair. The ambush was officially beginning. "So, Merritt," Thatcher started, swirling the wine in his glass. "Sutton tells me you have been under a lot of stress lately, managing the trust, working that demanding government job. It must be exhausting for a single woman to carry all that weight on her own." I chewed my turkey slowly, keeping my eyes fixed directly on him. "I am perfectly fine, Thatcher. But thank you for your sudden concern." Thatcher chuckled, a dry, patronizing sound. "Look, we got off on the wrong foot a few weeks ago. Things got heated. But it is Thanksgiving, and I am a big believer in family. I also know that you pride yourself on being the strong, independent woman who does not need anyone. But let's be honest here. You are clearly resentful of the life I provide for your sister. You feel the need to act tough when what you really need is just a little financial help." My mother rigidly stared at her plate, ignoring the blatant disrespect pouring out of her son-in-law's mouth. Sutton nervously took a sip of her wine. "I want to help you, Merritt," Thatcher continued, reaching into the breast pocket of his tailored suit. "I want to give you the financial freedom you are so desperately trying to simulate." He pulled out a crisp, heavy piece of paper and slid it across the mahogany table. It stopped right next to my water glass. I looked down. It was a cashier's check made out to me. The amount was $75,000. "Take it," Thatcher commanded, his voice dropping the friendly act and taking on a hard, authoritative edge. "Consider it an early Christmas bonus. Take the 75 grand, buy yourself some nice dresses to replace the ones you ruined, stop being so miserable, and officially resign as the executor of the trust. Sign the management rights over to Greer. You get a nice payday, and you disappear from our financial affairs forever. Everybody wins." I stared at the check. $75,000. He was trying to buy the keys to a $2.5 million estate with a fraction of the cost. It was profoundly insulting. He was offering me stolen money to step away from my own father's legacy. "Well," Thatcher asked, drumming his fingers on the table, "are we going to do this the easy way, or are you going to keep playing the stubborn scapegoat?" I picked up the check. Sutton let out a highly audible sigh of relief. Greer finally looked up, a triumphant smirk forming on her lips. They honestly thought I had a price. They thought their stolen money could buy my submission. I held the check by the edges. "You know, Thatcher," I said softly, $75,000 is a lot of money." "It certainly is," Thatcher replied, leaning forward confidently. "So, just say thank you and we can move on." I gripped the thick paper and ripped it straight down the middle. The sound of the tearing paper echoed sharply in the silent dining room. Sutton gasped. Thatcher's confident smirk vanished, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief. I placed the two torn halves together and ripped them again. Then again. I methodically shredded his bribe into tiny, unrecognizable pieces. "What are you doing?" Thatcher shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "Are you out of your mind?" I stood up from my chair. I gathered the handful of shredded confetti that used to be his check. I walked slowly around the table, stopping directly behind Darby's chair. The child looked up at me, her iPad still blaring. She had a plate of expensive artisan flatbread in front of her. I held my hand over her food and slowly opened my fingers. The tiny pieces of the check fluttered down like snow, covering her meal in a blanket of destroyed financial documents. "Eat your own trash, Darby," I whispered. Darby shrieked and pushed her plate away. Sutton jumped up from her chair, her face contorted with rage. "You are psychotic, Merritt. Get out of my house," Sutton screamed. I turned to look at my mother, who was sitting frozen in shock. Make peace, mother. That is what you said. But there will be no peace for thieves. I looked back at Thatcher. His face was pale. He was breathing heavily, realizing his manipulation tactic had just been obliterated. You do not have enough money to buy me, Thatcher, I said, my voice cold and firm. Especially since you still owe $4,100,000 to people who are much, much worse than me. The blood instantly drained from Thatcher's face. His eyes widened in pure, unadulterated terror. He knew that I knew. I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. Thatcher was a cornered animal, and cornered animals rely on primal instincts. For a narcissist, that instinct is public humiliation. He believed that if he could isolate me in front of an audience of high society peers, my professional composure would shatter under the weight of peer pressure. A week after Thanksgiving, Sutton and Thatcher hosted a lavish gender reveal party at the most exclusive country club in the city. It was an obscenely expensive affair, entirely detached from their grim financial reality. There were towering floral arrangements of imported white orchids on every table, a live string quartet playing classical renditions of pop songs in the corner, and a massive ice sculpture. I walked smoothly across the plush carpet wearing a tailored emerald green power suit. My presence immediately sent a ripple of tension through the room. The guest list was overwhelmingly composed of Thatcher's wealthy venture capitalist friends and Greer's country club socialites. When Sutton spotted me, her jaw dropped. She immediately grabbed Thatcher's arm. Thatcher turned, his eyes locking onto me. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flash of genuine panic cross his face. But surrounded by his affluent peers, he felt invincible. He decided to use the crowd to force my hand. Thatcher picked up a crystal champagne flute and tapped it with a silver spoon. The sharp ringing sound brought the low hum of conversation to an immediate halt. "Excuse me, everyone," Thatcher called out, projecting his voice with the polished confidence of a seasoned scam artist. "If I could just have your attention for a moment. We have a very unexpected guest today." The crowd parted slightly as Thatcher walked toward me, a condescending smile plastered across his face. Sutton followed closely behind him. Greer watched from a distance, her face pale with anxiety. "Merritt," Thatcher said loudly, ensuring every single person in the room could hear him. "I am honestly surprised to see you here. After the way you have been treating this family, locking down the estate, refusing to help your own mother, I figured you would be too ashamed to show your face today." Murmurs of shock and disapproval rippled through the crowd of wealthy onlookers. A few of Thatcher's friends shook their heads, casting judgmental glares in my direction. They had clearly been fed a narrative where Thatcher was the generous savior and I was the greedy, bitter sister holding the family wealth hostage. "Please, Thatcher, do not cause a scene," Sutton said, projecting a tone of wounded grace. "It is my special day. Let's just ask her to leave quietly." "No, Sutton," Thatcher interrupted, playing the righteous protector. "Your sister needs to understand the damage she is doing. This is supposed to be a celebration of our growing family. But instead of supporting us, Merritt is hoarding your late father's trust fund out of pure spite. She is trying to deny our unborn child their rightful inheritance." The room was silent. The social pressure was suffocating. In any other circumstance, a woman standing alone in a room full of hostile, privileged strangers being publicly berated would break down. Thatcher reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of thick legal paper. He stepped forward and shoved it toward my chest. "I am giving you a chance to make this right," Thatcher said, his voice dripping with venom masquerading as mercy. "Right here, right now, in front of all of our friends and family. This is a standard release form. It officially relinquishes your control as the sole trustee and releases the family funds to Greer and Sutton. Sign it, walk away, and we will forgive everything you have done." I looked at the piece of paper in his hand. Then I looked up into Thatcher's eyes. I let my shoulders drop. I let a heavy, defeated sigh escape my lips. I allowed my expression to soften into one of utter exhaustion, playing the role of the broken, beaten woman who simply could not fight anymore. "I am so tired of fighting with you, Thatcher," I whispered, keeping my voice just loud enough for the people in the front row to hear. "I am tired of the screaming. I am tired of the drama. Sutton let out a triumphant little breath, her eyes lighting up with greed. Thatcher's smile widened into a full, arrogant beam. He thought he had won. But if I am going to step down, I continued, my voice trembling slightly with manufactured defeat, I am not signing some random piece of paper you printed off the internet. It has to be done legally. I am a federal auditor. I will not risk losing my license over improper estate documentation. I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out a blue-bonded legal folder. I opened it, revealing a dense, multi-page legal document covered in official-looking clauses and fine print. I brought the official trustee dissolution and asset transfer forms, I said, pulling a sleek silver pen from my bag. It releases my authority entirely. But as the primary beneficiary representing the family, you have to countersign the recipient acknowledgement before I sign the release. Thatcher did not even hesitate. The promise of millions of dollars blinded his judgment. He snatched the silver pen from my hand. He did not ask to read the fine print. He did not ask to consult his lawyer. He simply laid the document flat against the edge of a nearby high-top cocktail table. I stepped up right next to him. I placed my left hand flat over the top quarter of the document, resting my palm directly over the bold header, pretending to study the paper for him as he wrote. Sign right there on the bottom line, I instructed softly, pointing to the designated signature block. Thatcher eagerly scribbled his signature across the bottom of the page, pressing so hard the ink almost bled through the thick paper. He stood up, handed me the pen, and gestured grandly to the document. Your turn, Merritt. I took the pen. I did not sign the document. Instead, I carefully picked it up, blew gently on the wet ink to dry it, and slid it safely back into my blue-bonded folder. I closed the folder with a sharp, satisfying snap. What are you doing? Sutton demanded, her brow furrowing in confusion. You did not sign it. I looked at my sister, the mask of exhaustion evaporating from my face. I stood up perfectly straight, the cold, calculating energy returning to my posture. I never said I was going to sign it, Sutton, I replied, my voice ringing out clearly across the silent ballroom. I said Thatcher had to sign it. And he just did. Thatcher frowned, stepping forward. Give me that paper, Merritt. Stop playing games. What exactly did I just sign? I offered him a terrifying, ice-cold smile. You did not sign a trust release, Thatcher. You just signed a corporate immunity waiver. It is a legally binding document that officially strips your logistics firm of all limited liability protections. Every single cent of corporate debt your company owes is now permanently attached to your personal assets. Thatcher froze, his mind struggling to process the legal trap he had just stepped into. Including, I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper, the $4,100,000 debt you owed to the Shadowlenders. I bought that debt, Thatcher. I own it. And, because of the waiver you just blindly signed in front of 50 witnesses, I now have the legal right to seize your mansion, your cars, and your personal bank accounts to satisfy that debt. I turned on my heel and walked out of the ballroom. Nobody tried to stop me. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, staring in stunned silence as I marched out the mahogany doors. When the walls close in on a narcissist, they do not self-reflect or take accountability. They double down. 3 days after the gender reveal party, a process server handed me a massive stack of legal documents. Thatcher had hired Richard Hawthorne, one of the most ruthless, high-priced corporate litigators in the state. Hawthorne was a shark, a man notorious for burying his opponents in frivolous motions and orchestrating brutal character assassinations. Thatcher was suing me for document fraud, coercion, and deceptive business practices, petitioning the civil court to invalidate the waiver he had signed. 2 weeks later, we met for the official legal deposition. The setting was a sterile, glass-walled conference room located on the 40th floor of Hawthorne's prestigious downtown law firm. The air conditioning was turned down to a freezing temperature, a classic intimidation tactic designed to make the opposing party physically uncomfortable. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table. My posture was straight, my hands resting calmly on my leather portfolio. I did not bring a lawyer with me. As a certified federal auditor who routinely testified as an expert witness in federal court, I knew the rules of evidence better than most attorneys. Thatcher sat across from me, flanked by Sutton and Greer. He looked smug again. The sheer presence of his expensive attack dog lawyer had reinflated his fragile ego. Hawthorne started the camera recording, stated the date and the names of the parties present for the record, and immediately went on the offensive. "Miss Merritt," Hawthorne began, leaning forward and steepling his fingers. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries. You have engaged in a highly vindictive campaign to destroy my client's business. You crashed a private celebration and utilized deceptive sleight of hand to trick Mr. Thatcher into signing away his corporate protections." I looked at Hawthorne, my face expressionless. "Ask your question, counselor." Hawthorne narrowed his eyes. "Is it not true that you harbor a deep-seated, pathological resentment toward your older sister? Is it not true that you are profoundly jealous of the financial stability that Mr. Thatcher has provided for her?" He was deliberately using heavily coded language, trying to paint me as the bitter, aggressive single woman trying to tear down a successful family out of pure spite. "Objection to the relevance," I replied smoothly, my voice never rising above a conversational volume. "My relationship status has no bearing on Mr. Thatcher's failure to read a legally binding document before signing his name to it." Hawthorne sneered, flipping open a legal pad. "You presented that document as a trust release form. You explicitly told my client that if he signed it, you would relinquish your control of the family estate. That is the legal definition of fraud by misrepresentation." I never uttered the words trust release, I stated clearly for the record. I told him it was an asset transfer form. I never stated what assets were being transferred. His greed caused him to make a massive assumption, and his arrogance caused him to bypass basic due diligence. That is not fraud. That is terminal stupidity. Thatcher slammed his fist on the table. "She is lying," he shouted. "She told me it was the trust money." Greer was standing right there. "She heard the whole thing." Hawthorne held up a hand to silence his client. He turned his predatory gaze toward my mother. "Mrs. Greer, I would like to swear you in for the record." The court reporter administered the oath. My mother placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the whole truth, and sat back down. She was wearing her best designer suit, clutching a tissue. "Mrs. Greer," Hawthorne said gently, "can you tell us exactly what your daughter Merritt said to Mr. Thatcher before he signed that document?" My mother took a deep, shuddering breath. She looked at Sutton, who offered her a desperate, pleading nod. Then she looked at me. I waited for a sliver of maternal instinct to kick in, but my mother had spent her entire life worshipping the illusion of prestige. "Merritt walked into the party and ruined everything," Greer said, a single tear rolling down her cheek, perfectly on cue. "She shoved the paper at Thatcher and told him it was the legal release for the family trust. She promised him the money. She lied to him. She manipulated all of us." The breath caught in my throat. It was one thing to enable toxic behavior in private. It was an entirely different universe of betrayal to sit in a legal deposition, place your hand on a Bible, and commit felony perjury to destroy your own child. Hawthorne smiled a triumphant, predatory grin. "Let the record show the witness confirms the plaintiff's account." "Thank you, Mrs. Greer. I think we have everything we need to take this to a judge and have Miss Merritt stripped of her assets and her federal license." I sat perfectly still. The room was suffocatingly quiet. I slowly leaned forward, resting my forearms on the mahogany table. "Mother," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Do you understand that committing perjury carries a penalty of up to 5 years in federal prison? Why are you lying to protect a man who is actively bankrupting you?" "Because you're a disgrace to this family," Greer screamed, abandoning the sorrowful act. "You are trying to tear down a good man who gave your sister a beautiful life because you are miserable." I simply nodded, accepting the death of my relationship with my mother. I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a certified financial statement. "Mr. Hawthorne," I said, devoid of emotion, "before we conclude, I have a professional question regarding your firm's ethical compliance. I strongly suggest you look at this document before you say another word on the record." I slid the paper across the table. Hawthorne sighed, picked it up, and adjusted his glasses. As he read the numbers, The color drained from his face. His arrogant posture collapsed into sheer panic. "I see you recognize the routing numbers," I said smoothly. "That is a verified wire transfer trace. Yesterday, Mr. Thatcher paid your firm a retainer fee of $200,000 to secure your services. However, because his corporate accounts are frozen, he initiated an unauthorized wire transfer directly out of his company's employee pension fund." Hawthorne gasped, dropping the paper as if it were on fire. "Mr. Hawthorne," I kept my eyes locked on the lawyer. "You are currently holding $200,000 of stolen pension funds. Accepting stolen capital to finance a civil lawsuit is a direct violation of ethical guidelines and constitutes receiving the proceeds of a financial crime. If you continue to represent Mr. Thatcher for even one more second, I will forward this document to the state bar and the federal authorities. I will have you indicted as a co-conspirator in a money laundering scheme." Hawthorne was a ruthless lawyer, but he was not stupid. He stood up so fast his heavy leather chair crashed into the glass wall behind him. "Off the record," Hawthorne barked, trembling with fury. "Strike that. On the record. Let the record show that as of this exact moment, I am formally withdrawing as legal counsel for Thatcher due to an irreconcilable conflict of interest regarding the source of my retainer." Thatcher jumped up, grabbing Hawthorne's arm. "Richard, you cannot do this. I paid you." Hawthorne violently yanked his arm free. "You paid me with stolen money, you absolute idiot. Do not ever contact this firm again." Hawthorne grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, slamming the heavy glass door. The multi-million-dollar lawsuit had just been decapitated in under 30 seconds. I stood up, picked up my portfolio, and walked out of the room. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had saved weeks ago. "Blair," I said, speaking to the senior investigative journalist at the city's largest newspaper. "This is Merritt. I have the files. It is the biggest pension embezzlement in state history. Print it." By 5 o'clock that evening, the article was live on every major news outlet in the city. Thatcher's empire was officially burning to the ground. When the article dropped, the public fallout was catastrophic. Thatcher's face was plastered across the evening news. The drivers whose pensions he had stolen were protesting outside his corporate headquarters. His carefully constructed illusion of the wealthy logistics king was shattered into a million irrecoverable pieces. Thatcher transformed from a polished executive into a trapped, feral beast. His personal accounts were frozen. His high-priced lawyer had abandoned him. The massive debt he owed was now legally held by me, and he knew I would show no mercy. He had played every card in his deck and lost. So, Thatcher decided to do what cowards do best. He decided to run. It was a Thursday afternoon. Sutton was at their suburban mansion, desperately trying to ignore the news vans parked at the end of their street. Thatcher burst through the front door, his face pale, sweating profusely. He bypassed Sutton entirely and sprinted up the sweeping staircase to their master bedroom. Sutton followed him, her heart pounding. She found him frantically pulling designer suits from the closet and shoving them into a large leather duffel bag. "Thatcher, what are you doing?" Sutton demanded, her voice shrill with panic. "There are reporters outside. We need to call a PR firm. We need to fix this." Thatcher did not look at her. He kept throwing clothes into the bag. "There is no fixing this, Sutton. The feds are coming. I am leaving." "Leaving?" Sutton gasped, stepping in front of his suitcase. "What do you mean you are leaving? Where are we going?" Thatcher finally stopped. He looked at his pregnant wife, the golden child who had spent her entire life believing she was untouchable. The mask of the loving, progressive husband dissolved. What remained was a cornered, arrogant man who deeply resented the family he had used as stepping stones. "We are not going anywhere," Thatcher sneered. "I am going to Switzerland. My flight leaves in 4 hours. You are leaving me?" Sutton cried, tears welling in her eyes. "You are leaving your pregnant wife and your daughter?" "Thatcher, you cannot do this. We have no money. Merritt froze the accounts. I do not care about you or your toxic mother." Thatcher shouted, his rage boiling over. "You really think I wanted to spend the rest of my life playing house with a clueless gold digger? You contributed nothing to my life. I used your family's money to build my company because it was the only thing you people were good for. Sutton gasped, the sheer hatred in his words hitting her like a physical blow. She reached out and grabbed his arm, a pathetic, desperate attempt to cling to the fantasy. You do not mean that, Sutton sobbed. Please, Thatcher. Thatcher forcefully shoved her away. Sutton stumbled backward, crying hysterically. Thatcher zipped up his duffel bag, grabbed his passport from the bedside table, and stormed out of the bedroom, leaving his weeping wife behind. Sutton collapsed onto the plush carpet. Her perfect life was gone. She reached into the pocket of her designer pants with trembling hands. She bypassed the friends she had tried so hard to impress. There was only one person on Earth who had the power and the competence to navigate the catastrophe Thatcher had just unleashed. I was sitting in the Federal Field office alongside Agent Vaughn when my phone vibrated. The caller ID said Sutton. I put the phone on speaker and nodded at Agent Vaughn, who began recording the call. Sutton, I said calmly. Merritt. Sutton choked out, her voice raw and broken. He is gone. He is leaving the country. He called me a gold digger. We have nothing. Please, Merritt, unlock the trust. You have to save us. I listened to the golden child finally understand what it felt like to be entirely helpless. The hook was set, and the final stage of my retribution was ready to begin. Sutton, stop crying and listen to me, I commanded, injecting a tone of desperate urgency into my voice. Where's Thatcher right now? He just left. He is driving to the airport. Call him, I instructed. Put him on a three-way conference call right now. Tell him I am on the line. Tell him I am ready to surrender the trust. There was a frantic shuffling sound. Sutton merged the call. It rang 3 times. What do you want? Thatcher barked. His voice was muffled, competing with the roar of his sports car engine. I told you we are done. Thatcher, wait. Sutton cried out. Merritt is on the line. She wants to talk to you. Why the hell would I want to talk to Merritt? Thatcher sneered. Thatcher, it is me, I said, pitching my voice slightly higher, allowing a tremor of manufactured defeat to bleed into my words. I heard what you did. I know about the flight to Switzerland. You cannot stop me, Merritt, Thatcher shot back, his arrogance returning. Your little federal lien only froze my domestic accounts. You cannot touch me once I am in Swiss airspace. I can make all of this go away, I continued, my voice breaking perfectly. You won, Thatcher. I cannot let my pregnant sister and my elderly mother be thrown out onto the street. I am offering you $2 million in liquid capital. I will initiate an emergency wire transfer from the primary estate trust directly into your offshore corporate holding account. $2 million, cleared instantly. You can go to Switzerland and never look back. Just leave the mansion to Sutton and sign the divorce papers. A low, cruel chuckle rumbled through the phone. He thought he had broken me. $2 million, Thatcher mused. Send the wire. I looked at Agent Vaughn. He nodded and typed a command into his secure terminal. I was not logging into the family trust portal. I was accessing a highly encrypted software program utilized exclusively by the FBI's white-collar crime division. Agent Vaughn and I had anticipated Thatcher's flight risk. We needed concrete, irrefutable proof of his international money laundering network to secure a federal indictment. We needed to catch him moving stolen capital across international borders in real time. Agent Vaughn had authorized the creation of a honeypot. The account I was currently accessing was funded by the United States Treasury. It was loaded with exactly $2 million of government money, entirely rigged with federal tracking protocols. I typed Thatcher's offshore routing numbers into the transfer field. I am initiating the transfer now, I said. I hit the enter key. 10 seconds later, a sharp ding echoed through Thatcher's phone. Got it, Thatcher cheered, unable to contain his glee. $2 million cleared. Thanks for the cash, Merritt. Wait, Thatcher, I said, keeping him on the line. The agreement was that you leave the house to Sutton. You need to keep the money in that corporate account to pay off the mortgage lenders. Do not move those funds. Thatcher let out a booming, arrogant laugh. You really are stupid, Merritt. You think I am going to leave a dime in this country? I am wiring this entire $2 million directly to my private, untraceable account in Geneva right now. I am out. I heard the rapid clicking of his keyboard on his phone. He was taking the bait. He was executing the international wire transfer himself, completely establishing criminal intent for a federal conviction. Done, Thatcher boasted. The money is gone, Merritt. It is sitting safely in Switzerland. Enjoy cleaning up the mess I left behind. He hung up. I lowered my phone and stared at the federal monitor. A green tracking bar appeared on the screen, tracing the digital path of the $2 million as it rocketed across the Atlantic Ocean, hitting the servers in Geneva. An extreme, lethal smile spread across my face. Thatcher had not secured his freedom. He had just personally signed his own federal arrest warrant, wrapping his criminal intent in a neat digital bow for the FBI. Agent Vaughn picked up his radio. Wire intercepted. Tracking confirmed. Suspect has crossed the international threshold. Arrest teams at the airport, move in. 20 minutes later, Thatcher pulled his sports car up to the private aviation terminal. As he stepped out, carrying his duffel bag and his passport, four dark SUVs swarmed him. Dozens of heavily armed federal agents poured out, weapons drawn. Thatcher dropped his bag, his hands trembling as he raised them in the air. The arrogant logistics king was thrown face-first onto the hot tarmac, his wrists secured in heavy steel handcuffs. He wept as they read him his rights. It has been a year and a half since Thatcher was dragged off that tarmac. The dust has long since settled, and the federal justice system handled the rest. Thatcher's criminal trial was incredibly brief. When a federal auditor hands the FBI a digitally tracked, international wire fraud portfolio, there is very little a defense attorney can do. Thatcher was convicted on all counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and international money laundering. He was sentenced to 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. There will be no country club dinners or startup pitches in his foreseeable future. But Thatcher's imprisonment was only the beginning of the fallout. Because he had blindly signed the corporate immunity waiver at the gender reveal party, I was legally recognized as his primary creditor for the $4,100,000 debt I had purchased from the shadow lenders. I showed absolutely no mercy. I foreclosed on everything. Sutton lost the mansion, the luxury cars, and her endless supply of vanity funds. Stripped of her fake royalty status and her husband's stolen money, my sister was forced to file for total bankruptcy. The woman who used to sneer at people who did not wear designer labels now works grueling double shifts as a cashier at a local grocery store just to afford basic rent for a small, two-bedroom apartment. Her daughter, Darby, no longer has the luxury of throwing $200 truffle soup onto the floor. Stripped of her spoiled arrogance, she has learned the hard way that she has to appreciate and eat whatever discounted food her mother brings home from the grocery store. As for my mother, Greer, the consequences of her betrayal were profound. Because she had secretly mortgaged the family cabin to fund Thatcher's crimes, the bank officially foreclosed on the historic timber property. The woman who cared so deeply about social standing and keeping up appearances lost her home and her retirement savings in one fell swoop. She was forced to move into a tiny, cramped apartment on the far outskirts of the city. All of her friends and flying monkeys in the Homeowners Association conveniently abandoned her the exact moment the money dried up and the federal indictments hit the evening news. I walked away from all of them and never looked back. I changed my phone number and entirely severed the toxic bloodline that had tried to drag me down for 3 decades. Using the recovered funds and my legal leverage, I officially bought back my father's original estate portfolio, securing his legacy the right way. But I did not stop there. I used the remaining capital from the liquidated assets to establish a massive, fully funded trust exclusively dedicated to providing legal and financial support for the truck drivers who had their pensions stolen by Thatcher. I made sure the wealth my family tried to squander was redirected to the hardworking people who actually deserved it. I am sitting here today in the quiet peace of my penthouse. My heart is light. That ruined silk dress taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Never kneel down to clean up the mess of people who intentionally throw garbage at you. I stripped them of everything they valued because they valued a lie over their own flesh and blood. My family calls me a monster. They tell anyone who will listen that I am an evil, bitter woman who threw her own mother and pregnant sister out onto the street out of pure jealousy. But I ask you this. Was I wrong for refusing to leave them a single lifeline? Did I go too far in my retribution, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, do not forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. Thank you for listening, and I will see you all in the next story.